Welcome back, everyone, to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now. I'm so excited about my conversation today. Through the work we do at Support Now, we have such incredible partnerships, and a lot of those partnerships are with really, really special nonprofits. And in this case, I have been able to meet our guest, Natalie Proshek, through Team Luke, which she will tell you about a little bit later today. But in our conversation, collaborating with ways that we can bring our great missions to the world, I realized that Natalie herself has this incredible story. She doesn't just work for an incredible nonprofit. She is the mom that benefits from a really intimate and scary story of a traumatic brain injury. So Natalie Proshek, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. It's such an honor and so happy to meet you.
Of course. One of the things that struck me in our initial conversation is you are kind of like this Venn diagram of a person that I find to be very interesting. Of course, you're a mom, you work for a nonprofit, and you're also a social worker by degree, at least. And so I think you offer this really interesting perspective because you know what it's like on the more like clinical side, helping families through things. And then you yourself have gone through the traumatic event. And then now through the work that you do with Team Luke, you are now helping others in a different capacity. So to start, I would love just to learn more about your story. What happened with your son? Kind of what brought you to this world?
Yeah, so I have a daughter. She is about to be 4. And then we have our son, Jace, who just turned 2. I've been in the social work field for quite a while now. I worked for actually a nonprofit here in Atlanta prior to. It's a residential treatment center. And so I worked there previously through my internship and stayed with them ever since. And then, just with the commute, that's from being in Atlanta. The commute from where I live to there, just with 2 kids, it was just going to be really hard to navigate. And I was kind of put in this situation where like, okay, I love what I do. And I think I need to kind of take a step back and look at like stepping into this mom role a little bit more now that I'm going to have 2 kids to care for. But then with Jace, we found out on my 20-week scan that he had a congenital heart defect. So we knew in utero, he had 2 holes in his heart.
Yeah.
And so he didn't have like that middle wall that separated the left and the right ventricle from each other. And so, but the pregnancy was actually very smooth, like no complications at all, just lots of doctor appointments, follow-ups. And they just kind of said like, yeah, like, when he's born, he'll be able to come home and then you'll bring him back at 6 months and he'll have his open heart surgery. And then, there shouldn't be any ongoing, adverse effects from all of this. But then at 33 weeks, I noticed like a decrease in Jace's movement in utero. And I did go in and we did notice like he was not moving. And what we actually found out was, and I found this out after delivery, that I had like a really small placental abruption, but they think because of his heart defect, he just couldn't sustain. So they ended up wheeling me in for an emergency C-section. I mean, it was one of those things too, where it was like, I'm calling my husband, I'm tracking his location, right? Like we're calling everyone to get our daughter from daycare. And I'm like, where are you? I'm watching his location, telling them like, he's going to be here in 20 minutes. So I didn't even see him. He walked in the room, they wheeled me to pre-op. And then I'm on the bed and he comes in. I'm like, all right, we're having this kid, right? C-section was very smooth. But then Jace was never able to come off oxygen. And like, we didn't know why, that shouldn't have been the case with like the diagnosis he had with his heart, but they just couldn't really get him off oxygen. And then they transferred us from the NICU to the cardiac ICU here at CHOA. And at 2 months old, he ended up having a cardiac arrest and he went into cardiac arrest for a full hour. They could not resuscitate him and he was put on ECMO life support. And so that whole hour, his brain did not get oxygen, and that's where he developed a severe hypoxic brain injury, and his lungs took a really big hit too. So that's kind of some ongoing effects that we have from it. And his body was just so sick. We ended up actually spending over 300 days in the hospital when he was born. So he didn't come home until he was about 11 months old. And when I was in the hospital, I was there for so long just trying to research, and I came across Team Luke through social media and ended up following their stuff. Jace discharged. I found out about their conference that they do every year, which we have it coming up again in October. And at the conference, I just kind of went up to the social worker they have and I was like, look, I love what you guys are doing. I want to help you. What can I do? Can I volunteer in some way? And I stayed in contact with Ruby and Tim and Rhonda. And Tim actually came out to Atlanta and he was like, look, like, let us bring you on. And Ruby kind of needed some help from like more kind of clinical kind of side of things, which is what I have done my whole career. And I now am able to help them do support groups and some one-on-one support and just trying to branch out and help more families in the Atlanta area because Team Luke is based in Texas. And so I'm really trying to help it grow on the East Coast because there's nothing else like Team Luke out here that I have found. And that's kind of how you and I came along too with meeting, is trying to get stuff going out in this area more, particularly in Atlanta.
Natalie, what surprised you about your experience with Jace as a mom versus kind of what you ever experienced from a social work perspective? What were some of those,
Yeah.
what did you expect? What didn't you expect? 'Cause I would imagine there was kind of like a jolt of reality, but I don't want to be too presumptuous here.
Yeah. No, so like, what I did, previously was working at that residential treatment center. I worked with the kids that lived there, but also their families. I did a lot of parent support, family work, and just sitting with these families who were really in the thick of it with trying to support their kids. And what I went through with Jace, it really put things into perspective, like, you know, almost losing your child and having to sit with your child when you can't do anything and the helplessness. I actually remember, I don't know if you know who Brené Brown is, but she's a social worker and like my idol. I love her. And she wrote a book that had come out called Atlas of Emotions. And I remember just sitting next to Jace on ECMO and just like honing in on this book because it was helping me put meaning to these emotions, these crazy emotions I was feeling, right? Like, oh yeah, that's what that was, or oh, this is what it was. It's like I have the emotional knowledge, right? But when you're in the thick of it, it's just like everything is so flooded. And at that point, it also just gave me a perspective of like the vulnerability and how scary it is as a parent when you are just at a point where it's all out of my control. When I actually went back to Hillside and worked with them a little bit, still doing contract work, that was something I was scared about, was like, didn't want there to be too much transference kind of going on, but it actually.
Like you're saying, like you didn't want to project too much of your
Exactly.
in your own way of processing things onto
These
families that
other
might be
parents who are now in
processing
the
it.
thick of it and feeling like they don't know how to help their kids,
Yeah, yeah.
And I just feel that gratitude becomes way different when you are put into that role as a parent. And I really do feel like it helped me be able to provide more for the families that I work with now, because I truly grasp this idea of not knowing how to help and what to do as a parent.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's only so much a textbook, or when you're going to get your education on these things, there's only so much you can learn about until you're actually placed in the position of being a caregiver, being a mom of a child who nearly loses their life. There's a big difference between what you learn and what
Yeah.
you're taught versus what that experience is actually like, which is why I think you hold such a unique perspective, because you do know what it's like. And like you just said, just because you know what it's like doesn't mean that everyone is having that same
Exactly.
experience. And so I'm just curious, from the social work side, what are some of the ways that you try to discern how someone's feeling? Because it sounds like, when you're experiencing such trauma, it's hard to think clearly. It's hard to
Yep.
speak. Like, how have you changed the way you talk to people so that you can better understand where they're at? Because I would imagine the better you understand where they're at, now you can supply them with the right
Yeah.
resources. But until and I think people get really guarded also when they're in a state of trauma. So kind of what have you learned, and kind of what are the tactics that you use to try to understand that with parents?
Well, and I think the biggest thing too is like acknowledging that, right? Like that this discussion and the like coming in, it's hard, but the fact that they're showing up, it shows that they're like wanting at least to get something out of this, right? But I think it's kind of like how I used the Brené Brown book, right? It was like I needed something else to name it for me. Right. But not just say like, I know this is what it's feeling, right? I know this is what you're going through, but it was one of those things where it's like, here's various things you could be going through right now. right? And maybe presenting some of those and then presenting as a question though, right? Because I don't know what they're going through. Everyone experiences it differently. And the way you respond to trauma can be so different. Some people really put guards up and some people let all their guards down. And so
Right.
I can't go in and say, like, I know this is what's going on for you, but more so like, I'm wondering, right, is this maybe just some like helplessness kind of coming on, right? Hopelessness, right? And maybe kind of exploring it in that way, throwing out some key things that research shows is likely going on, even though they could be presenting it in different ways, and then seeing if they recognize, like, yes, that is what it is, right? For instance,
That's really
like,
interesting.
yeah,
I want to pause you there. I think that's really
yes,
interesting what you just said. So what you're saying is, I think this is great advice for anybody, not just for social workers.
yeah,
This is great advice for the friend that wants to help their friend that's going through this hard thing, not to label, not to assume the label,
right.
but rather you can guide them. Like, it seems like you would probably be feeling hopelessness or
Yes.
helplessness or, really overwhelmed and vulnerable, but let them say yes.
Yep. Yeah.
And then once, because they may say, no, I don't feel like that at all.
Right.
Like,
Right. And then
and,
it's like,
and
okay,
now
cool.
you
Now
can
we
have a
know we don't need to
dialogue.
address that. Right. Like, let's
Right.
maybe look at a different area. Right. But then also when they do say, like, okay, yeah, letting them actually like sit with that yes. Right. Like letting them actually sit with it versus like, yes, that's what it is. Okay, cool. Let's move on from that. Right. It's like, we've named it. Let's move on. It's like, no, like, cool. Like, we've named this. Now let's sit with this, right? I know. And that's like that's the hard part is going through. And even now, like my nervous system is all out of whack and I'm aware of it, right? And sometimes I need someone to be like I've told my husband this too. I'm like, I just need you to like grab me and be like, breathe, slow down. We're okay, right? Even our nurse has had to do that for me because it's like we get so caught up in all of it that it's hard until someone like helps me and then realizes like, let's sit in this moment. Like, we're okay, we're safe. Like, you can feel this, you can do this, Like giving them that space to feel it and do it, but doing it from a place of like, maybe they're not ready to sit in it too. And like, okay, I'll come back and meet you there when you're ready to be there, but I'm still going to present you with it.
I think that's also really interesting. One of the terms that I have learned along this journey is this idea that people in grief, which is what you experienced, right? Like you are
Yep.
grieving.
Yep.
Absolutely. This for our audience, grief does not always mean loss. I think that in our culture, we tend to think about grief as someone's died. That is not what grief is. It is the absence of something that you
Yeah.
once thought or wanted or desired that is no longer there, right? Like
Beautiful.
that's very different. And I've learned through this process of talking to families that a lot of people tend to hide their grief, or it presents very differently than maybe what you see in the movies. Like what you see in the movies is women or parents that can't get out of bed, they're crying,
Yeah.
they're not eating, they're not doing anything. In my experience talking to families, most of the moms I talk to, they are over functioning,
Yes.
right? They're going so fast and so hard that it's so difficult for people to realize that they are actually immensely struggling.
Yeah.
They're just masking it so well.
Yep.
Is that your experience talking to parents?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I can speak for myself, right? Like that's who I am. And actually there's like I'm trained in a type of therapy called radically open DBT, and it focuses on what we call like an over controlled personality or presentation, meaning like we tend to like perfectionism, anxiety, right? Autism spectrum disorder, even like that's all over controlled, right? Like we focus so much on performance, rigidity, and a lot of like in this brain injury world, that is what we have to do, right? We're scheduling, we're caring, we're okay now also showing up as a wife or a spouse and as a mom, right? Like all these roles that it's hard to just like let the emotions feel because our nervous system is constantly just like, what's next, right? What's going to happen next? And also like
Really
that
interesting.
grief, it could also be because of like what you're kind of talking about is what we call ambiguous grief, right? Where it's not like a loss of a person. It's like, the loss of like, what could our family be like if our son, wasn't disabled? Or the loss of like, where my career could have gone if I didn't go through this. Lots of different
Mm.
things around that.
I've
And
never heard that term. I've never heard
yeah,
that term before.
yeah.
Ambiguous grief.
ambiguous. And Team Luke, I will say, we offer an ambiguous grief group because that's a lot of TBI, brain injury. Like, that's a lot of what comes up for us. And we don't, like, what kind of like what you were talking about of like what media, makes it look like. It's like we don't have the time to sit in our bed and just cry, right? And like also like how healthy is that? Right? When we're doing that every day, all day, it's like we also have to show up in all these other areas, right? And so
Well, and because you're a
sometimes we have to
perfectionist or
be
because it's this pressure in our nervous system saying, well, if I can't control this, I'm going to control everything else. And that means you're putting
yes,
like so much stress and overdrive on showing up for your daughter differently or involving yourself in the school differently because, well, I
yeah,
don't know I can't control what's happening with Jason. I don't know what's going to happen here. So I'm just going to pour myself into all these other things. By the way, I want to reiterate to that none of this is bad. We're talking about this from the framing or the perspective of like, this is a possibility. This is what can happen. That doesn't mean you're bad. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means like for some people, this is what it is.
it is
And
right.
as you know, part of our heart here at Support Now is trying to talk about these things so that as communities, as family and friends can know what this is, can identify it so they know how to interact. So one of the questions I have for you, Natalie, is how does your community best show up for you? What are the
Yeah.
things that for you means like they're a good friend? Like what are you looking for even today? Now that you're,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say you're past anything because obviously you're still in it and
Right,
you're not in the hospital anymore. Let's
right,
call it, we'll
right.
label it that way. How have the people in your community that you've cherished, what have they done that has allowed them to stand out and to really be considered like a good friend?
Yeah. And I want to say too, like what I love about this is where I wish I had support now, right, at that time. And why I'm excited to partner is to get that word out a little bit more about support now and that lend a hand, right, role that you guys can provide. Because that was the biggest thing, okay? Because I'm stuck at the hospital for over 300 days. My husband's trying to work and care for our toddler at home. And at the time, right, she was 2 and 3 years old. Get her to daycare, take her to extracurriculars. And we are very fortunate that we have an incredible community around us who help with the childcare. When Jace went into the arrest, like we've got lots of family support. So my sister, our moms, our friends, everyone was helping out with that. I know before we came home, our friends surprised us and they came and deep cleaned our whole house. They did yard work. They
Mm.
did all this stuff without us asking. People were sending us, like some of my friends even bought Maisie Christmas presents. So financially, we didn't have to worry about that, right? It was just like finding these little ways because I'm very fortunate. I feel that our community knew they could not take this pain away, right? They could not. They could not make things better. And so they were just finding ways to show up. And that lend a hand thing, I think, is so important when people are in this kind of situation. And
Yeah.
truthfully, like what research shows too, is that people need a community, right? If you don't have your community, that's then when you start to experience more depression, more anxiety, loneliness, right? And loneliness is, as humans, we're not meant to be lonely and go through things alone. And so I wish I knew about support now. We could have put this out there more, but I will say our community was so amazing with showing up in that way. And even to this day, right? Like, I'll be having a day where it's just like tough, so tough on me. And I'll just like text my sisters and be like, "Ah, I wish I could just cry right now, right?" And they just give me the space to say
So
those kinds of
special.
things. And that
That's so special.
is, yeah, it's special. Yeah.
It's so special, and I love that what you hit on, and it's so interesting. Most people don't know this, that your social community improves health outcomes.
Right. Yep.
You are like it's proven. Like it is a proven thing. You're more likely. There's a lot of statistics I've read related in the cancer world. Like the more community you have, the more likely. It's not that you're to beat cancer, but
Right.
your energy and your outlook. Like you can
Yes.
show up differently
Yeah.
when you have people behind us, even if it's something like prayer. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be financially. It doesn't have to
Yep.
be food. It just has to be something that shows someone that it's worth fighting. It's worth keeping going. And it sounds like that's the role that your family or your sisters have played as well, because they've given you space, not for advice. They've
Right.
given you space to vent. And I think that's
Yes.
the other part of this that you're speaking to that's so important. Just because someone wants to talk about their situation does not mean they want your perspective. They just need a place to dump it,
Right.
like be that dumping ground so that they can get this off their chest. That might transfer into advice at some point, but don't be so quick to just give advice because most people are not going to be very receptive to advice
Right.
given, especially if you've never been through what you've been through.
Right, right. And I think the hard part too is it's also like hard as the caregiver going through this or even like the survivor going through this is it's like, okay, going back to again, having to be vulnerable and say like, I do need help here, and I think that's one thing I'm hoping to try to support these people realizing is like it is hard to be vulnerable to do this, but like we've got to ask for that help, right? Because if
Yeah.
we don't, then we're gonna not just feel pain, but we're gonna start suffering and we're gonna be doing it alone,
Well, but what you said is, I think that's a really interesting point. It's so hard to be vulnerable. And I think we put a lot of pressure on the family, the primary caregiver to ask for help. It's like, well, you need to
Yep.
ask for help. You need to get
Yep.
comfortable asking for help. But what you're saying is before you can ask for help, you need to feel comfortable
Finding
at
your
least
people.
getting all your emotions out. So in order
Mhm.
for a family to be more honest and open and vulnerable with their needs, it's actually getting that emotional support right first. Like, do I feel like I have the foundation to be honest about my emotions? And
Yeah.
then once I'm honest about my emotions, then I can transition into, okay, well, now that I've trusted you with all that, here are, three things you can do for me this week that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's a
Yes.
really, really interesting point because I see this all the time. Family people just say, well, just tell me what you need. It's like, I can't even process my own emotions to know what I need.
Exactly.
And so I need to actually get that out first. And then we can talk about the more tactical and practical things
Yep.
on a day-to-day basis. It's a really
Yes.
insightful perspective, Natalie. I think that's actually quite profound and a very, very important part because I do think we're all so quick to rush to like, well, what can I do right now?
That's one question, right? That if that's asked to me, it sends me into fight or flight even more, right? Because I'm like, I'm so flooded. Like now you want me to break down this mental load I have and try to give you specific things. It's like, just take a look and see where you can help, right? That's how we can show up for these families going through this is like you take ownership, you take accountability and you try to fix like me, hopefully, and if this is something you wanna do, like, show me you wanna do this, just
Mhm.
do it and just show up and no, I will be so appreciative in whatever way it is, right? Those days
Yeah.
when we would come home and there's just DoorDash on our, porch and we're just like, "Oh my gosh, wow, I don't have to worry about dinner anymore tonight."
Just one
It's just
less
like
thing.
little things like that
Little
that can go
things.
such a long way.
Natalie, as we wrap up here, I mean, again, this has been so insightful, and again, I value your perspective because, again, you touch kind of all of these little boxes that I think are very, very interesting and so helpful and so inspiring. If someone wants to learn more about Team Luke, about you, where can they find out, so or they can follow
Yeah.
along in your personal journey, or however, whatever calls to action makes sense.
Yeah, so Team Luke has an Instagram and Facebook page and a website. So to learn more about how you can get connected in Team Luke, you could go on there. Like I said, I personally offer support groups monthly. So I do a survivor group, I do a caregiver group, and a sibling group. So if there are siblings of person or child who struggled with a brain injury, I also do support groups monthly for them. And we are starting some one-on-one support. So you would just go onto Team Luke and fill out the information that you want to support in that way. We also have Jace's page. Jace the Brave is what we call him. We've got his Instagram page where we post updates on his journey and things we're doing as a family and navigating as well.
Natalie, thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to find ways to collaborate, to partner, and honestly, just to continue to learn from you. I mean, this to
Yeah.
me, hearing stories about what you've experienced, that is what allows us to keep building and innovating and thinking about ways that we can better this experience for communities across the world, not just for TBIs, but for loss and for cancer and for all of these other major life events that happen across this country every day, every hour. And I know no one really knows what to do. And it's hard to know, but I think we can, as a culture, we can get so much better at understanding these
Yeah.
things where it doesn't feel like this whiplash of like, oh, now I suddenly need to learn this playbook. There are some tried and true tips here that you've shared that I think will be super valuable. So thank you so much. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your own story. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jordan. I appreciate it.